Yes, sir. Hurts.
Thank you all for your attendance tonight. We'll go ahead and resume our meeting. For those who just came in, we have been in closed session for the past 30 minutes. So before we continue our open session, I'll ask for a motion that we return to open session from our closed session.
Motion to return to open session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're back in open session now. So again, welcome. As we begin our meeting tonight, let's take a few moments and stick with our tradition of having a few moments of silence. We'll ask each of us to bow and meditate in your own way for the first few moments of our meeting, asking for help and assistance with the work that we have before us, keeping our children in mind and their interest in the school system. So if you will, as everyone comes in and takes the seat, I'll ask you to bow in meditation for the first few moments. Thank you. Let's stand for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just want to sing my country too. Under our consent agenda, we have no general administration items, so we'll move on into personnel. We have, for those following the agenda published tonight, we have items B, C, and D under personnel, the acceptance of resignations, retirements, rehires, terminations, and leaves of absence, the approval of classified personnel, the approval of licensed personnel, and actually, if you look over the other side, we have the approval of administrative appointments and approval of reinstated personnel. Dr. Lassane.
Dr. Cash, Mr. Johnson, members of the board, you have had the opportunity to review the July personal report and including the changes since the committee of the whole meeting. Are there any questions regarding any of those items? Thank you.
No questions? Okay, thanks, Dr. Singh. Okay, next, we have the minutes from the June 1st Committee of the Whole meeting and the June 8th Board of Education meeting. I ask if there are no additions or corrections to those minutes, we entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items and the minutes from June.
Motion to accept minutes is distributed.
Second.
Does that include the consent agenda items?
Yes, it does. Yes, sir.
All right. So we have a motion made and a second to approve the consent agenda items and the minutes from the June meetings. Any other discussion? Not all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Johnson, would you like to make any introductions at this point?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cash. Tonight you have approved two principals to fill vacancies within our school system. So I'd like to take a moment and introduce these folks to you tonight. I think I've lost my resume. Sure did. Let me try here. All right, first is Sheila Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, yeah, go ahead and stand up, Ms. Jenkins, so we can get a good look at you. We'll welcome you warmly here. My favorite part of getting to know Ms. Jenkins is she's a graduate of South Iredell High School. And so she's a local girl that grew up and did well. She has not spent her career in Iredell-Statesville schools, so we're anxious to capture her and bring her back to our community. She's a resident of Stony Point. Ms. Jenkins currently works in Alexander County, where she is their Director of Accountability and Technology. She is a former middle school principal who missed the environment of the school setting and found out that central office is not all it's cracked up to be. She wants to be back in a school setting working with children on a day-by-day basis. So we are very anxious to have her come and fill the vacancy for us over at Northview IB. In addition to her work as the Director of Accountability and Technology, she's been the principal of East Alexander Middle School. She also served as the assistant principal there at East Alexander Middle School. She was also an assistant principal at West Rowan Middle School and North Rowan Middle School. She is a graduate of the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program, and that program was in existence, so she was one of those high school kids that we captured and got interested in this profession. Ms. Jenkins is a graduate of Western Carolina, where she received her bachelor's degree in elementary education. She has her master's degree from Appalachian State University. She has her EDS from Appalachian State University, and she has furthered her EDS work at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Ms. Jenkins, I think you have 2 adult children, is that right?
I have a 20-year-old who is a rising junior in state and a 16-year-old who is a rising junior at Alexander-Statesville.
That's right. And I think you've got your better half with you tonight, too. So, Ms. Yeah. Well, Ms. Jenkins, we are delighted to have you in Iredell-Statesville Schools, and we wish you much success at Northview IB. Thank you. Our next appointment is Susan Fail, and Ms. Fail, if you'll stand up, please. Now, I know this lady is not a stranger to you because she's been in our district now for about 10 years, I would. 13 years. Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Ms. Fail is not from around here. She's from New York, I believe. Western New York. Yes, we'll preface that. She is a graduate of the State University at Fredonia with a bachelor's degree, and she has her master's degree from Gardner-Webb University in Boiling Springs. Susan has had many roles here in our district, starting off as a teacher, as an instructional facilitator, assistant principal, and now the principal at Cottle Creek Elementary. She's also been the Iredell-Statesville Schools Assistant Principal of the Year in 2011-12. She was the RTI coordinator and assisted with the systematic deployment of RTI in grades K-5. She has provided professional development with RTI and MTSS implementation throughout the district and used lots of research-based interventions. She has also facilitated the implementation of M-Class in grades K through 3 and Ames Web in grades 4 through 5. She has provided extensive professional development and balanced literacy and the implementation of Daily 5. She's also a technology person herself and likes bringing technology into the classroom with iPads and Apple TV, various software programs and laptops and smart boards. And one of the things that she does really well is she's really into social media and has done an outstanding job of promoting Troutman Elementary School on their social media there. We are very excited to have Susan take over the leadership there at Cottle Creek, and she has 2 of her favorite fans with her tonight. These are her 2 sons. Yeah. So what's these boys' names, Ms. Fail?
This is Dylan, who's going into 8th grade, and this is Jonathan, who's going into 6th.
All right.
They served with me through Troutman from the beginning too.
So guys, it's tough to have a mama that's a principal. You don't get by with much when that happens. But thanks for sharing your mom with us. We're excited about Susan being there. We know you're going to do a great job at Cottle Creek. Thank you. And her husband just walked in the door, Matthew Cook. So that means he has to buy dinner tonight.
Well, congratulations to both of you, and we look forward to working with you in your new role. We'll move on into our recognition portion of the meeting. We have the Red Cross Partnership. Mr. Johnson.
Yep. Catherine, come on up to the podium there. This young lady is one of our staunchest supporters and a great ally and a supporter of the school system. She has been working with us now 3 or 4 years. Is that right?
A year and a half. It goes by really fast, though.
Well, I can't get these years right. They all start to run together. But Catherine is with the American Red Cross, and you can see in your memo tonight that she has several partnerships with our schools, including Cloverleaf Elementary, Brawley Middle, Lake Norman High School, North, West, South, and Statesville High Schools, and the Career Academy in Troutman. We thought about bringing the principals in tonight because she does want to recognize them for their leadership and partnership. We'll do that at a principals meeting a little bit later on in the fall, but she wanted to take just a minute and give some accolades to these schools that support the Red Cross. So, Catherine?
Thank you, Dr. Cash and Mr. Johnson and the board for letting me come and speak with you. The American Red Cross mission statement says, the American Red Cross prevents, alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. The American Red Cross, through its strong network of volunteers, donors, and partners, is always there in times of need. We aspire to turn compassion into action so that all people affected by disaster across the country and around the world receive care, shelter, and hope. Our communities are ready and prepared for disasters. Everyone in our country has access to safe, life-saving blood and blood products. All members of our armed services and their families find support and comfort whenever needed, and in an emergency, there are always trained individuals nearby ready to use their Red Cross skills to save lives. Whenever I go into the schools, I stress this message to the students. High schoolers can donate at the age of 16 with parental consent, and the schools are very gracious to let us come in and do blood drives there. To just say how well they did, so last year South Iredell actually had the most, but we have a new winner this year. Statesville High School collected 193 units of blood, and the sponsors there, it's sponsored by the HOSA, which is the Allied Health Group, and it's Sandra Thorne and Paige Fox, and I work closely with them and their students. At South Iredell High School, they collected 187 units of blood, and that is hosted by the HOSA Allied Health Group and Kathleen Green. North Iredell School collected 163 units of blood, and there's two sponsors. ROTC sponsors the one in the fall, and that's Tracy Davidson. And in the spring, the FFA sponsors that one, and that is Amelia Fox. West Iredell High School collected 135 units of blood, and that's sponsored by the HOSA Allied Health Group, and that's by Carol Johnson. And then Lake Norman High School collected 117 units of blood, and that was done by the FFA and Dana Wise. And this year was Cats joined in the blood drives, and I know that school's a little different because the students are coming from all the high schools and taking classes there. So with the Career Academy, Miss Green from South actually helped sponsor that one and use the HOSA and allied kids she's working with, so from all of the so all the schools, and they collected 32 units of blood. And we also have a scholarship that we give these students. The teachers pick a student. The qualifications are a student must be a senior in high school, must be planning to attend an accredited state university or 4-year school or 2-year school, professional trade school. And the student must be an active participant in the high school blood program and should exhibit a leadership role in the coordination and recruitment of the blood drives. Statesville chose to choose 2 winners, Swati Dahi and Shema Carr. South Iredell also chose to do 2 winners, Julie Emery and Noel Nunez. North Iredell also chose to do 2 winners, Pete Huffman and Abigail Urich. West Iredell High School chose to do 1 winner, Taylor Gallion. And Lake Norman High School chose to do 1 winner, Jenna Augustine. And each student received anywhere between $300 and $700 to go to their college, and the Red Cross sent a check to the schools and the students' names. We have a future blood donor program where we work with our middle school, educating them on what the Red Cross is and what we do. And Brawley Middle School participated and collected 25 units of blood, and I worked with Dana over cash. And then our Pint Size Hero program is when we go into the elementary school and just talk about what the Red Cross is overall. And Cloverleaf Elementary School participated and collected 42 units of blood, and that was done by Danita Dow. Overall, Iredell-Statesville schools collected 894 units of blood, which may have saved, you guys ready? It's a big number, 2,682 lives. That's a big deal, and I can't do that without the schools, and appreciate you guys letting them host the blood drives and being a part of the Red Cross. And I have a little certificate for you to hang up. You guys get a certificate too. And then also, the Iredell-Statesville students received over $2,000 from the Red Cross in scholarship funds. And we're looking for another big year. We have actually a better scholarship opportunity for the students where they can get up to $2,000 from the Red Cross. So last year, the money value was lower. This year, it's going to be higher, which is a big deal. So, and thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you want to get a picture? Yes. Yeah, we should get a picture of that.
Who wants it?
Thank you for the caps and
Yeah.
stress balls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the end of the meeting, we'll be throwing them at each other. At least there's some. Yeah.
For those that didn't realize that Chuck Gallion's daughter is the one that won the award at Westover.
Johnson talked so highly of her, and I worked with Taylor for all the blood drives that I was here for. So from January 2014 to May 2015, got to work with Taylor, so. She's gonna do great.
Thank you. She's going to Campbell University, so
Yes.
I need about 6 more of those scholarships. Trust me. At least 6. That would be a big help. And
Thank you.
thank you. My dad and I together have given 14 gallons of blood. Of course, he's not here anymore, so 14 gallons.
That's a lot of blood. Next, we have our athletic recognitions from Lake Norman High School, Mr. Armstrong.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cash, Mr. Johnson, members of the board. I'm happy to recognize and congratulate the following Lake Norman High School athletes for their outstanding accomplishments. And I have several categories, and Ms. Bonham has volunteered to help me. From the men's lacrosse all-state, we have, and these young people are here, please come up as I call your name. And I apologize ahead of time because I'm scared of some of these names. So if I mess up, I apologize ahead of time. But for men's lacrosse, we had all-state Trevor Miller, Austin Vogel, and Fisher Shimmer. Any of those here? Okay, let's give them a hand. Next, we have women's lacrosse team. They are state champions. Congratulations. The members, I'm not sure if all the members are here, but I'm going to try these names. Carly Vaccaro, Lydia Scott, Sydney Pittman, Jordan King, Carolyn Tuttle, Michaela Chester, or Michaela, Sheridan Duma, Kieran Rinaldi, Gianna Red Arrow, Jamie Carmichael, Levy Googly, Levy G. I'm sorry, Levy. Susie Crothers, Rosa Lee Shimmer, Juliana Dorshak, Allie Gaskins, Desiree Penner, Ashley Moran, Jackie Jafaro, Vanessa Grods, Karina Kemphorn, Sierra Kemphorn, Allie Laidman, Laney Wyman, Julia Sawicki, Emily Sharona. I can tell when I mess up, because you all like Allie Van Sant, Elena Dorshak, head coach Chris Shimmer, assistant coaches Anthony Vaccaro and Lisa Stiles. Let's give them all a big hand.
Two rows.
The men won a couple years ago, the men's cross.
Look for me.
No, I can't do it. It's terrible. You won't be part of it.
State winners.
Thank you. And we have several women's soccer All-State, Cammie Couch, Kristen Brown, Mary Manzer, and Riley Orr. Are any of them here tonight? Let's give them a round of applause. And for men's track state qualifiers, we have Wes Anderson, Zach Clark, Wyatt Fedorka, Jake Helms, Jack Mastrodia, Cody Maynard, Justin Richard, and Ty Sauerbrey. Women's track state qualifiers, Melissa Zamiti, Reagan Porterlance, Holly Bailey, Aubrey Van Sant. And men's tennis state qualifier, Ryan Juris. I appreciate it, and ladies, thank you for being here. Congratulations again, and for being here in July, you're very special. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to echo on behalf of the board that we really do appreciate you taking the time and coming in on a summer off, that we know you practice all the time and we know you stay busy, but we really appreciate having the opportunity to recognize you here formally tonight. So thanks again for you coming. Thanks to the coaches and parents and all for your support.
I'd like to recognize Lakeshore Middle School. I know Principal Penley and Athletic Director Mr. Weston there. We can't practice in our practice field every day of the week, so we have to rotate, and he's very accommodating, and we go every other week that we practice at Lakeshore Middle School every other week. So if you want to give those guys a raise, they'd appreciate it.
Let's give them a hand of applause. We'll move on into our non-consent agenda then for this evening. And first item is the 2015-16 Title I application. Diane Morgan.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Cash, Mr. Johnson, and members of the board. Last week at the Committee of the Whole, I shared with you some details on the Title I application for next school year. I'm here tonight to see, after you've reviewed it, if you have any questions.
Questions or comments about the Title I application? Again, several comments. We may be preaching to the choir at this point, but several comments were made about how neat that application was and how easy to read it was, so we appreciate that effort. I know that's not an easy thing to come up with. So.
Thank you very much. Well, if there are no questions, I'd like to ask that you vote to approve the application so that I can submit it.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the Title I application as presented.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll move on to the child nutrition bids for 2015-16. Tina Wilson, and again, this is a voting item.
Good evening, Dr. Cash, Mr. Johnson, members of the board. Last week, I gave you the bids for our 15-16 school year, and those do need a vote after reviewing them this week. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Questions about the bids for child nutrition? I'll entertain a motion that we approve those as discussed last week.
I'll make the motion, we approve the bids presented by the Child Nutrition Department.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries too. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Next, we have the senior fees for CCTL and the VPAC program. Dr. Taylor?
Dr. Cash, members of the board, last Monday night at the Committee of the Whole meeting, I presented for you the request from CCTL to institute a senior fee of $35 and for VPAC to increase their senior fee from $30 to $35 to help cover graduation expenses, diplomas, diploma covers, et cetera. Glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments about the senior fees?
Only question I have, do we need to make a motion to accept all of these on this sheet, or just the?
The others are already in place. I presented that material to you for comparison purposes.
I'll make a motion that we accept the senior fees for CCTL and VPAC as presented.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next, we have the approval of bids for the HET building. Rob Jackson.
Dr. Cash, members of the board, Mr. Johnson, last Monday night, Dr. Miller presented to you the bids for the Autotech heat program. The low bidder was PS West Construction with a low bid of $472,110. That money is covered through the capital project, capital budget line in the budget. Are there any questions?
Questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the bids for the heat building.
Okay, we have a motion to approve this.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Not all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. I believe there was something added to this line item. Is that correct, Kelly? Bids for the East Iredell project? Okay. We received bids. I think Dr. Miller talked to you last week. The bids were very time sensitive. There was a pre-bid meeting last Thursday. Bids were received at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The low bidder was Pro Seal Systems Incorporated from here in Statesville. Their bid was $258,500, and this is for the parking lot.
53. This says 253.
253.
If you take the lump sum bid, it's $258. If you take the alternate, which reduces it to an inch and a half less, an inch and a half pavement versus 2 inches,
Okay.
that is a $5,000 reduction. The recommendation of the administration is to go with the full 2-inch I-2 asphalt surface for $258,500. And that money is covered under the lottery proceeds.
Motion to accept bid of $258,500 for East Iredell Elementary.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. And next, we have the alternative school accountability model. Dr. Taylor.
Yes, Dr. Cash. Each year, schools are rated under the North Carolina accountability model. Our alternative schools are graded on a different scale because of the nature of the school and the flux of students in and out. The board has to approve those recommendations, and the district recommendation is that our alternative schools use option C that was presented for you, which is the alternative schools progress model.
Any questions or concerns about the alternative school accountability model recommendation for option C?
I'm sorry, I missed last week's CAL meeting. Will these students receive a diploma? Will it be any different than the other high schools?
If students complete the graduation requirements through Monticello or CCTL, those students will receive a diploma from those schools. This is actually the accountability model that grades the schools. That grades the schools. So whether or not they met their requirements or not. If you turn over to the next to the last page, you can see the requirements that all traditional schools are rated on for the accountability model. Basically, there, that list numbers 1 through 8. But because alternative schools don't have kind of the full continuum, or they have students who are not enrolled for the 120 days or 140 days to be able to count, they have an alternative model to measure their growth.
Yeah, this is a voting item. We need a motion to approve if we agree.
I make a motion, we approve the alternative school accountability model, option C, please.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, thank you. Next, we have the lottery applications. Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Dr. Cash, members of the board, Mr. Johnson. We have 3 lottery applications that we would like to submit, which need board approval. The first application is for $129,950. This is reimbursements to us. This has already been paid, so we're getting reimbursed from our lottery proceeds to our fund balance. It is for Energy United Phase 2 controls. The second application is for $71,350, and that is the project at North Iredell Middle School, which replaced some HVAC equipment. And the third is the multiple, we had several sites where we replaced some compressors and some HVAC equipment at multiple sites for a total of $84,557.47. We'd like to apply for reimbursement of those funds. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions or comments about the lottery applications being proposed?
Make a motion, we give Dr. Miller that authority to go ahead.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. And
Thank you.
thanks. Next is the Iredell-Statesville Schools Vehicle Usage Agreement. Mr. Armstrong.
Dr. Cash, Mr. Johnson, members of the board, from last week, the following adjustments were made to the agreement. First of all, the title, just wrote out the entire title, Iredell-Statesville Schools Vehicle Usage Agreement. And then on the second page, we did separate what is acceptable uses of district vehicles and what is prohibited uses of district vehicles. It was asked that be separated into 2 different categories, and so that was done. And at the very, under accident notification, number 1, the first thing we ask our drivers to do is contact the nearest law enforcement agency. And then second, immediately contact the administrative supervisor and director of transportation if possible. Those were the changes that were made that you requested last week. Are there any questions?
Questions or comments about the vehicle usage agreement?
Mr. Armstrong, again, I'd like to thank you for the work you and your committee did on getting this done as quick as you did. Thank you.
Mr. Page, appreciate it.
We need a motion to approve this agreement. So moved. We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. We have a second. Ms. Haynes. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. Well, next, we have several second readings of policy revisions.
Me too.
First is fidelity bonds, second reading of Melissa White.
Good evening, Dr. Cash. Excuse me, I bring before you policy number 8530, fidelity bonds. Like I said, it is a second reading. It's simply changing the minimum amount for which the finance officer should be bonded. Current policy reads, I think it's 10,000, and state statute dictates that the minimum be 50,000. Our current fidelity bond is 100,000, so we are in compliance with state statute. We just need to update the policy. I have received no comments since the first reading. I'll be happy to try to answer any questions, but I think it's pretty simple.
Comments or questions? Or if not, we need a motion for approval of policy number 8530.
Motion to accept staff recommendation on update.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Have a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Motion carries.
On that one.
Next, we have several second readings. Mr. Armstrong, I'll let you handle these. However, if you want to do them in group, it's fine with us.
Okay. I don't know if, first of all, Dr. Cash and members of the board, Mr. Johnson, I can go through each one of these and then you can vote all at once. That's okay. All right. Starting with policy 8530, policy 3515, religion in schools. There have been no comments since the first reading for that policy. Policy 5028, 6130/7267, automated external defibrillator. Haven't had any comments or questions since the first reading. Policy 5070/7350, public records, retention, release, and disposition. I have not had any comments or questions since the first reading for that policy. Policy 5120, relationship with law enforcement. Have not had any comments or questions since that first reading. Policy 6200, goals of school nutrition services. Have not had any comments or questions about that policy. Policy 6210, organization of school nutrition services. I have not had any comments or questions concerning that policy either. And policy 6220, I always do this, 6225, free and reduced price meal services. Have not had any comments or questions for that policy either. Policy 6230, school meal and competitive food standards. We did make a few adjustments on last week at the CAL meeting, so that's reflected in the in our policy. Policy 6235, beverage vending sales. That was, and I'll stand corrected, that was the policy last week where we had some adjustments made by Ms. Wilson when she came, made some comments on last week. And so those adjustments were made to policy 6235. And then policy 7265, occupation exposure to hazardous chemicals in science laboratories. I have not had any comments or questions for that policy since the first reading. And the very last one, policy 9220, security of facilities, have not had any comments or questions for that policy since the first reading. I'd ask if the board would vote to approve these policies.
Any questions or discussion regarding any of these policies? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we approve the adjustments or revisions made to the policies or to a new policy that's been introduced.
Motion to accept policies as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
And now we've got some first readings of other policy revisions. We've got technology and the educational program. Dr. Blattner.
Dr. Cash, members of the board, Mr. Johnson. We have our first reading for policy 3220. In 2011, the state got rid of the requirement of a separate technology policy and said it should be part of the strategic plan. It did not get changed at that point in time because the federal government still required a local plan for E-rate purposes. The federal government has gotten rid of that requirement, so this would bring us in line with what the state has had, which is the technology plan shall be embedded with the strategic plan of the school system, and this is bringing just the language to meet with that. Any questions you might have, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions or comments?
Thank you.
Next, we have board attorney, policy first reading, Dr. Taylor.
Yes, Dr. Cash, I have several readings, first policy readings. Policy 2610 just basically gives the board attorney the ability to resolve bail bond and vehicle forfeiture matters, which our board attorney already covers for us. Policy 3100 addresses review of the curriculum, addressing the founding principles of our nation, which we already do that during Curriculum Review Week, but it puts that in policy to make sure that it is taken care of. Policy 3450 changes basically the word shall, or may to shall, in that principals and schools shall compile class rankings now instead of may compile class rankings. Our schools were already doing that with the exception of the IB program, and they will now be required to compile class rankings. And as a part of that conversation, we did have the discussion that we are moving forward with a conversation with our high schools and our high school principals, moving from a valedictorian, salutatorian that recognizes two individuals to a broader recognition in looking at a summa cum laude, magna cum laude, so that we can actually recognize more students for achieving at very, very high levels for the upcoming school year. And then policy 3460 addresses graduation requirements that and cleans up some language on courses, eliminates reference to a course of study for students who entered the 9th grade before 2009. And those will be sit for another month before they'll be voted on next month.
Comments or questions? Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Okay. Then we have item Z, discussion of regarding meals at the Board of Education work sessions, or what's known as our CAL meeting. Mr. James, you brought that up.
Yes, I asked the request that we spend a little time on it. Because of the way we did look at the times and getting back in there, the meal originally, because we were looking at trying to tighten those things up, between the closed session and the start of the meeting, it still leaves a void in there for those of us that are trying to get there quick and do that. So I'd like to reinstitute the meal back into that calendar, whatever's best there. I think Martin made a really good point the other night when we had our meeting. We need to kind of have it an eating meeting and just continue. Like when we had the pizza, we didn't take very long to do that. I would like to institute meals that are more of a working dinner, that type thing, so our time doesn't go extended any more than it has to. But I would like to make a motion that we put the meals back into our budget.
Mr. Chairman, I really think the next discussion, double A with Mr. Kelly, might also make changes in what Mr. James is discussing. So I wonder, should we kind of combine these two issues and put them on the table at one time? I know he's got He's got a motion hanging that's not been seconded yet, but,
And I'll withdraw that if you want to put the other discussion out there, so I'm fine with that, because they do intertwine. The times you started the meetings, you were going to bring that up, so.
I kind of think time should be set first before we discuss a meal, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I think that makes sense. They all are interrelated, which is what related our first discussion. So if the rest of the board's okay with that, I think we can discuss it all as one item, because it is involving how we can best and most efficiently perform our work and respect each other's time on the board, but also respecting the time of the administrative staff and other school system staff that come and present to us. So, Mr. Kelly's all right. He want to introduce the other topic. If you want to bring up something now just to get discussion started, it's just open among the board members.
We originally talked about both of those things together. So there's no problem with me to talk about them at the same time. And he's right. I think they do go together in a way. To say something about the start time, I think there are reasons to leave the start time where it is. If you go down the list from everybody, everybody has they're coming from somewhere. And there's a practice, there's a job, and that man's all over the state. And then we have someone coming from the southern part, and we have a southern part, and we have someone here that delivers things. So the time that we start, each person could give their opinion, and it might be a different time. So we have to adjust the time or try to find the time that suits everybody. The thing I would mention is that if we start at 5, I'm talking about the Cal meeting now. If we start at 5 o'clock, then it does coincide with our administration who comes out at 5 o'clock. They don't have to wait until 6 to come to our meeting. They could be there at 5. It also, especially looking at some of our agendas lately, which have run so late, I would just, if we're going to adjust the time, I'm almost adjust it earlier instead of later so that we're not getting out so late in the evening. But then again, I look at it and think, well, everybody has a reason for what they've stated with the starting time. I have a reason, everybody has a reading, so we can leave it where it is or we can move it, whatever. But I think it needs to be looked at just to be sure everybody's on the same page. That's my opening statement with the meeting times.
Well, one thing I've noticed just in the last 2 meetings, when we began with our closed session, there may be meetings we don't have one, but most of the time we have had a reason. And I know that we have been coached and prodded by our attorney to make sure that we remain focused on topics that are pertinent for closed session and not get tangential into something else. But I think this requires, to me, it requires a board commitment that if we're trying, and I think this is to be discussed a little bit later even in our agenda, but if we're to follow time estimates on certain items that come up, and especially if we're committed to being really efficient in the closed session and have that first, that has made our meetings more streamlined, I think, and we still get the business done. You know, we don't want to appear to the public that we're trying to make these meetings speed more quickly at the expense of not getting the work done. But I think, as most people know, we can do that more efficiently without getting into a lot of side discussions. And I think by having this kind of front end and back end time for closed sessions has made us be more efficient. And I think we've all seen that for the last 2 weeks. So just to throw that out there, because I've heard that discussed among several board members, that if we do that and stay within that time frame and we really do come back and get the open meeting started on time, that really hasn't been changed too much of our original.
Well, then I would inject there at that point then, if we're going to stay with the idea of having the closed session before our meetings, and they seem to come up more and more often, we don't want to go back to 5 o'clock, because then we'd be having a closed session at 4:30, and everybody would really be scrambling to get there. So if you leave it at 6, then 5:30 would be the closed session, and we go into the open session after that. So if we feel that we have a better timing going on with the closed session ahead of time, then we need to leave the time as it is.
And if we make it a working supper meeting, so to speak, yeah, I think we're talking about keeping our closed session within a limited time frame. And then if we go ahead and have the meal part and work as a working meal session, we should be able to get through the agenda much more quickly.
Now, let me, I don't mean to interrupt, but let me, I have to address that. It doesn't take us that long to eat a meal. It takes us 15 or 20 minutes. And it just so happened, not long ago, I was reading an article, and I forget the man's name. I'll try, but it's one of the greatest producers of our time in reference to movies. And he calls people in from all over the world and talks to them about when it is that they're going to produce the movie, how they're going to produce it, the money and everything. And he made the statement, I'll talk to anybody about anything at any time, but I will not talk over food, because they are concentrating on what they're eating or concentrating on what they're spilling on their tie and not concentrating on what it is that they're supposed to be doing. So I suggest that if we do that, we set aside a time that we're going to eat the meal. And what we have done is that we've started the meal, and when we see that the meal is going down and we have things that we can do while we're finishing up the meal, maybe, but not totally. Because I think when the meal is in front of you, you don't really concentrate on what's going on. And it might be one of the things that you don't need to concentrate on, whatever, but all of them are important, and I just soon not eat during the time that we are conducting business.
I think part of the reason too, from my perspective, and I know both of us were working, and we don't get done usually till 5, so 5:30 was a better alternative. But by the time I covered 34 counties, so depending on where I'm coming from and what time I'm trying to get there, so far I've been able to do pretty well. But yeah, eating is not part of that calculation unless I'm going to eat while I'm driving, and that kind of thing. So I think it's a good opportunity to still have the meal in there, to still do the efficiency of time. And like you said, 20 minutes or so, that's about what we give teachers. They got to use the bathroom, eat, and do this stuff and get back in their classroom.
Right.
So I don't think that we're asking for too much if we try to put that meal in there and make it efficient and do it as a working time that we're there. So I'm not looking for anything elaborate or anything like that.
No.
But it's just too hard, at least for my schedule. We'll do whatever we can do, but to get something eaten between that short time of work in there for.
Well,
at least for
I
myself.
think it's important too, and if we look too at the entire aura that's going on when the food is going on, there is communication going on among the board members and among the board members and administrative members that might not ever go on otherwise. Now, they're taking that opportunity. They're eating with somebody that they don't usually eat with, and they're talking to them about things that they might not be talking. It's a very valuable time to take the meal. I think it's a good break. We work toward the break, and that's a good time to put the meal in.
Well, not to belabor, but to speak to that point a little bit too, I remember back when we were going through our Southern Association of Schools and Colleges, back when we did that review, and their board session with 2 of us board members, the surveyors asked if we ever went on retreats as a board, or how did we really get to know each other. They were looking beyond our discussion of board agenda items. And since we have not used any resources to go out of town or even in town to a board retreat, so to speak, where camaraderie is established and communications, as Charles was talking about, I mean, this does give us an opportunity potentially to have some discussion and develop some camaraderie and working relationships among not only us as board members, but with the other administrative people as well. So we could look at it that way in addition.
Absolutely.
And I have a comment about the Committee of the Whole starting times. Would anybody be opposed to doing a 5:30 meeting time with a closed session at 5 if we needed it? I mean, that way we still have, our meetings go on so long anyway. And I also think it gives time for the staff, if they get off at 5, to get to the Unity Center by 5:30, we can be there at 5 o'clock and go ahead and get our closed session over with, you know, if we can possibly be there by 5. I mean, is it wrong to start on a half hour as opposed to an hour, 5 or 6?
But wait a minute, that's,
So in other words,
yeah, but that's counterproductive to what we're talking about in reference to leaving it where it is. If we come in at 5 o'clock, we're still coming in at 5 o'clock, which is when all the people are trying to get here. He's coming from the state, he's coming from all over. So at this point, if we're gonna, like he says, if that closed session is as important as we think it is at this point, then I think we ought to do the closed session at 5:30 and the regular meeting at 6, and it would be the same for Cal and the general meeting. Be the same thing. I'm just throwing that out.
It's less confusing for everybody if you keep
I'm
5:30,
open a little bit to
5:30,
that. I know Cindy works till 5 a lot of times now, and it gives her the opportunity to get here because she works more local, or at least I would understood on those days.
True.
So for me, I actually just have to take off work. I just have to just sit down and say I'm done at 4 o'clock in Rockingham County or wherever I'm at to come home. So I set my schedule accordingly. I'm a team player. Whatever the group wants to do, I'm fine with. But right now, if it was 5:30, most of the time I can actually still be in Davie County or Rowan County or somewhere and still make it here and do most of my work. But again, I knew this coming into being asked to be on the school board. I knew what the commitment was, and so I'm a team player. I'll make up the time somewhere, so I'm not worried about that. But I think the majority were trying to give you that time for them to get defused, or even the staff to, if they work to their office till 5 o'clock, they still got time to get there. And I think the meal is an important part, because like you said, if we extend to 10 o'clock or 10:30 like we've had some, you really need to eat something between 5 and 10 o'clock.
I agree.
or 11 or 12, and that's what I was
Or
saying.
11 or
Anything we
12.
can do to start it maybe even a little bit earlier, you know, that's what I was thinking, because, you know, me driving home at 11:30 or midnight, you know, by that time, my Verizon phone is dead. My battery has died. So.
And I fully
And my
agree.
husband's always worried about where I am, so.
I was looking more at putting the meal back in, so it would be a little less rush between start of the meeting, and then, but it's up to y'all on the time. I'm saying I'm gonna be open on that, so.
Well, we've had one meeting where we started at 5:30, and it was the earliest meeting. We had our closed session first, and it was the earliest meeting we've ever got out. I understand it's in the summer, and we didn't have a lot to talk about, but I don't know why that seemed to work. I don't know why we're looking at changing it back. As far as a meal goes, I think the thing anyone would look at is some consistency in when you do have the meal. And I certainly would recommend a set time, say 7:15 or 7 o'clock, that there'd be a 15 or 20-minute break, kind of like a TV timeout at the first time you're finished with a subject after 7 o'clock or whatever, if you're going to do it. And then I would also like to see us, if we do a meal, which I'm not really in favor of, but if that's what everybody needs and that's what they need, I think it should be sandwiches or something, something a little quicker than a full meal where you're having to do plates and all that kind of stuff. I would like to see it a lighter meal, and done in a timely manner where we've got these times set.
Well, let's go ahead and put them together again. And I know what Anna's saying, and I know what people are trying to get here. Right now, we have them set at 6 o'clock, and we have a closed session if necessary at 5:30. That's at the Cal meeting, that's at this meeting too. If we leave that and institute the meal, I would modify what Mr. Page says by one thing. If you set a time, that's like last meeting, I set a time for the delivery of. Well, we missed that because what we were discussing at the time went over into the other time. So you can't always say exactly when you're going to have it. But you could have a break time at a certain, you aim for a certain time and you try to do it. So I would say, leave the time as it is right now, reinstitute the meal as we can.
I'll second that motion.
Is that a motion? Okay, that's a motion.
One discussion. Who picked, Mr. Johnson, do you or Kelly or Who picks our meals?
Kelly, I
as
think,
far
has
as-
been doing it.
Pardon, Kelly does. So he's talking about something lighter, you know, Mike, you do like, maybe sometime do Subway sandwiches or something, just something.
Sure.
Instead of a full meal, but whatever. But
You're right, you can get trays, sub-sandwiches cut, you know, I mean, everybody knows that. So it doesn't have to be the same thing, but I love what we have, but we can change that up anyway.
don't bring any wings unless you're gonna bring beer.
Well, we've got a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Dr. Cash, can that motion be restated, please? Can you restate what?
You restate the motion, as I understand it, that we will leave both the CAL and the regular school board meeting at 6 o'clock with a closed session if needed at 5:30, evening meeting, and that we will have a meal provided as close to 7 or shortly thereafter as we can during the CAL meeting.
That was not in the motion of the time, but I was going to make an amendment to that time.
That's right. I stand corrected. Do we want to leave that as part of the motion?
That would take an amendment, which we can do. Have you, as soon as you officially announce the amendment as seconded, we'll move into it. I mean, the motion is seconded, we can make an amendment.
Okay, so we have the motion that's seconded there.
You have an amendment? Is that what?
Okay, he restate the motion properly and then introduce it as.
I interjected too much into that motion. So the motion is simply that we will keep both meetings set to start at 6 o'clock with potentially having a closed session at 5:30 if necessary, and that we will have a meal provided at the CAL meeting.
Reinstate the meal.
At the CAL meeting, right. Okay.
Now there needs to be a
And do we have
second.
Who made I made the motion?
And I second it.
Okay,
Second, okay.
now.
Now that the motion's been introduced, I would like to make an amendment that we take a 20-minute break at the first natural break between subjects after 7 p.m. for our dinner and our dinner break.
Okay, there's a proposed amendment to the motion. We need a second to that amendment.
I'll second it.
Okay, now, we can vote.
Now you can vote on the motion as
We
amended.
we can
Or you
discuss.
can discuss it
the
and then
motion.
if
The
there's-
amendment.
Any discussion regarding the motion with the amendment?
Yes.
You gotta vote on the amendment first.
Right, correct.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
All right, all in favor of the amendment to the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No,
All right, is there any discussion
on
to
here.
that amended motion?
gee, why didn't we have this first? But anyway, you know, all I'm saying is, I just don't want to lock it down. Because a lot of times we get in the middle of a discussion of one topic, and it might go 20 minutes or it might go 2 minutes.
But I liked his saying,
The-
it's a natural break.
The natural break between topics after 7 o'clock. But that motion, that amendment is passed, so the amendment is passed.
Moot point.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of the amended motion, please say aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, we have a motion that passed, or the gosh, I can't even talk.
Everything's, the motion passed. The motion as amended passed.
Everything passed with 2 noes.
All right.
Kelly get that. That was right.
Are you confused, Kelly?
Well, it's time for public comment. We did not have anyone sign up for public comment. Was asked, would anyone in the audience like to speak before the board? If not, we'll move on to other board member comments then. I think Mr. Page had a couple issues that he wanted to discuss regarding potentially going to paperless meetings and discussion of CAL meeting agenda presentation time allotments.
And I have one after that.
And then Max James has one other point.
Mr. Chairman, fellow board members, and Mr. Johnson, after a year on the board, I have a couple of issues I would like to address. The first is we need to move this board into the 21st century. Some of us are analog people in a digital world. I've even been referred to many times as a rotary dial person in a digital world. But we must move into the paperless world of digital technology. the amount of paper we use and the amount of time we require Ms. McCarrier to waste in putting our packets together is ridiculous. I hesitate making a formal motion to this cause. I would rather all of us to agree it's time to go paperless or computer-based, as I prefer to call it. I would like for our chairman and our superintendent to work with Ms. McCarrier and Dr. Blattner to make this happen without a mandate from the board. I would like to know the pleasure of the other board members on this issue.
I'll speak first. When I came on the board, I think me and Ms. Bonham were trying to do some paperless stuff. I'm not going to speak for her, but we were trying to do that. There is a mountain of paper that y'all use and people that read through, and I understand backlogging and the way to catalog that. But there are some systems in there that we could use through a Google document or others that we could pull past documents up, and you can still see what's at the last meetings and other things that are there. We really didn't want to institute any cost. We went with Kelly. She went through several options at that time, and we looked at different things. And I really didn't want to cost the county any more money to go through a cataloging system for this. But I think there's some opportunities now through Google Plus and others that we may be able to do our own system, maybe with some people who got a little more expertise than I do. And that's what I was wanting, to cut back on some of it and be able to get. I know one of the accesses to internet in this room was a question, if we needed to go to a shared drive or something that the school had. I know those are questions. And what I was trying to do is go paperless without costing us the additional money. And I think most of us have a laptop, and those of us that don't, we could probably work something out to have something that's there. That was the point of what we tried to start. And so I applaud Martin's point, but I think we just need to do the best we can to get to there and that. So I agree.
And I know one of the simple things that we as board members can do, it'll be a little extra work on our part, but I think we can do it, is take some of these second readings. You know, we can keep our first readings, and then if there's an amendment and Kelly needs to send us a second reading, we can do that. Otherwise, I mean, we can use our own notes from the prior month and use those, for our second reading. I don't see any reason why she would have to copy. I mean, some of these things, weigh 16 pounds. I don't see a reason for that. That's just something simple we could do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we can cut down what we're doing by using the same thing. I mean, the things that were presented tonight are the same print that we've had before. We could pull the print up from a month ago and have it in front of us. I'm hesitating. I'm almost like Martin, a rotary man in a computer age, not quite, and he's not either. But I would prefer not to have 7 or 8 of us sitting up here behind a computer board. I'd rather have the paper. I like the paper. And if I'm not mistaken, not knowing everything about them little buttons and everything, but when Kelly gets all of that into her computer, she pushes a button and sends it out by email. Or she can push another button and it prints. So if all of y'all want the email, fine, please print me a copy.
Ms. McCurry, what's it costing us? What is the estimated cost? I know you've done some cost analysis on preparing the packets for a board meeting.
Well, I had generated about 3 years ago, getting close to 3 years ago, one of the biggest packets, which I included the cost for the folders, the cost for the paper, actually consulted with Ms. White and asked her how much is it for a ream of paper and those kind of things. But with a big packet for what I was calculating off of, and including mileage and all that, you were looking at about $1,500.
For one meeting?
No, that was for the 2 meetings.
2 meetings, 1 month. So we're looking at $1,500 in labor and costs.
That was
I understand for a big monthly meeting, right? But we may look at $1,000 by the time we look at a monthly cost. I agree with Charles from the standpoint I don't like the computer, but I know that's our state meetings have all gone computer when we go to the state training meetings, and it's a way of the future. It's the 21st century. I think most boards are going paperless. Mr. Johnson, what are you seeing from you talk to other superintendents now?
Yeah, I would say that probably now a good half, maybe 60% of them are paperless. There are vendors out there that will sell you a software package that will make it real easy for you to do this. And we explored that a couple of years ago. And we turned that down just because it was cost prohibitive. The software was around $15,000 or $18,000, I believe. But now there are like these Google Docs that you can do this on your own. So I think this is something that we could probably put together for you guys, and we could probably wean you off paper too, because it is a little bit scary to be sitting here in a public meeting and you may not be able to find something. So for those of you that would feel comfortable, I know at the state school board meetings, they give those state board members an option. Do you want it wireless or paper or both? And we could probably do that for a while. We also, I know Mr. Page had talked to the county about them giving us access to the wireless here in the room. So I did get an email today from the county manager, and he said that they could set us up a guest account so that we could do that, which is one of the roadblocks that we've had in the past. So I think we're very close to being able to do this. And if you would like a practice session, I would recommend that at our upcoming end-of-year review, we try it, and we'll give you both. We'll have some technology set up there for you that afternoon, but we'll also have the paper packets too, and we kind of play around with both. But we can make that happen in a couple of weeks.
That'll be throwing us into deep water because that packet's about that thick, and you know, but that would be fine. I think that would, but I'm scared that you know,
Mr. Kelly.
yeah, we'll lose Mr. Kelly and myself will be hit down somewhere trying to figure it out, throwing our computers around.
And I don't get me wrong, I'm just, you know, we're staid and stoic and all that good stuff. You know, I played with computers and know enough about them to know that I think that step could be made. I you know, I like the paper. I like to be able to look at the paper.
I do too. I absolutely
Instead of being,
do too.
I mean, I can go back and find it. Well, you know, I can go back and find it right now in the paper easier, but now Hannah can probably find it in a computer faster. I know Max can.
I will tell you this too, though. I mean, on the flip side of that is I spend a lot of time behind a computer, and I don't like being tied to it, you know, and it's like, oh, I got to read my board packet. That means I got to sit here in this chair, you know, otherwise I can pick up, you know, my packet and take it with me different places, and I kind of like that, you know, but.
That's a point too. That is a point. That is right.
I'd like to interject. I would like to see us go paperless, keep up with the 21st century. But I think we have a policy. I like my iPad. You know, I get a lot from my iPad. Would we have to use equipment from the school? Because we passed a policy and I can't access Wi-Fi with my iPad, Mr. Blattner, right? It has to be a school tool.
They have to load.
You actually amended the policy previously to allow that we could use personal devices on the network with approval.
And then the other thing is, could we, for sensitive material, could we script it or encrypt it so that when we are talking personnel, it could be sent from central office to us and we have a code to decrypt it?
I would have to investigate that, but there are ways, like you mentioned Google Drive a couple times, there's ways that you can have folders only accessible to the people that say that they can be accessible.
right.
So it would be not passworded, but you are the only ones that have access to it. So there is ways of doing that.
Or you could print that on a paper and only give it to the people you wanted to. I just thought.
That is another way
Well, that's the reason I was saying if you had a shared drive that we could go on by internet, then we would never house it on our computers. So that personnel stuff would not be part of an inquiry by law or anything.
Yeah, and that was going to be my big question on,
Yeah.
because that's what I care about, the confidential stuff. But I figured that Dr. Blattner was going to bring up that he could easily have
Shared folder.
Yes, we could work out a system where I would be happy, basically, that's all I want to say, yeah.
And the only thing that when I was thinking about this, and Ms. McCarrigan and I have talked about, is when, because we were talking about trying to make personal notes on things, and that those personal notes are subject to sunshine law, and we'd be wary of any conversations that could be taking place online, that could be a violation of sunshine law.
Yeah, but I think
we could set it up that it would not happen.
Yes, we could set it up to to make it physically impossible for that to occur.
Exactly.
And that wouldn't be.
We have to say, with everything that we're doing in the schools, this is the school board, with everything that we're doing in the schools and technology.
Yeah.
I'd hate to think that we can't work that out. All those little things that might come up as questions that I don't even know what they are. But I have a feeling that there's an answer somewhere to every question that it would come up,
There
legal
is.
or otherwise.
There is.
Okay.
It's more of an awareness of it that you may be aware of.
Skype myself in on the meetings.
Well, I'm sorry we ended up with such a long discussion, but I think it's good, but, where do we, Mr. Johnson, I mean, I'm all for let's trying it, working it like you said, but, can we just take a look at it, or we need to make a vote, or what's the?
I think the consensus is you folks want to do this, and we can certainly start weaning you off, and that'll give the staff time to get prepared for this too.
Why don't you set it up like, I thought you said, why don't you set it up on that review time?
August.
The August meeting. That way, the next meeting is regular, perhaps whatever, but the one that we're going to go in for that afternoon, go paperless and see how it works.
Yeah, and maybe at each additional meeting, we can put a little bit more online and a little less paper. But for anybody that wants a paper copy,
They can always print
They can
it's just a
get
matter
it.
of pushing print, and we can do that for you.
All right.
All right, thank you. Can we move to my next topic, or, Mr. Chairman? My second issue is much more complex. I would like to discuss the focus and time issues we've had at some of our committee of the whole meetings. And it goes right along with a lot of what we were saying, and perhaps I should have read this at that point, but I felt I should wait till it was my turn. I understand the concept of all board members hearing everything instead of having specific subject committee meetings with just part of the board present. This process works well for a review of agendas and policy readings. However, I feel many times the subjects scheduled by our superintendent for the presentation at the committee of the whole are more informational on existing programs than providing information on issues that require board action. Many of these presentations scheduled for 15 or 20 minutes wind up taking an hour or more. I do enjoy hearing about some of these great programs, especially when it involves the children telling us what they're doing. To be honest, I would really like to see these presentations at the BOE meeting so more people can enjoy them. If presentations are going to be scheduled at the Cal meeting, I hope the superintendent chairman will let the presenters know their allotted time to present and answer questions, and their chairman will hold them to that allotted time. The board, however, always has authority to extend anyone's allotted time with a motion, a second, no debate, and a 2/3 majority vote. And I don't mean Mr. Cash is going to stand there with a whip and say, your time's up. I mean, more or less, in a way just to keep us close to our time. In the same mode, Mr. Chairman, I request that you become more active in maintaining the agenda and controlling discussions we have as board members. Every board member needs to be given adequate time to discuss issues, but we too often tend to beat dead horses to death. Now, I realize I'm the world's worst at this. So,
Wait a minute, who's talking? Okay.
yeah, I understand that. Now, I am saying to you, please feel free to use that gavel. Now, preferably on the table, not on my head, but you may have to use it on my head occasionally, and I understand that. I realize the committee holds just that, a committee meeting, and therefore needs a more relaxed atmosphere to conduct open discussion. I realize it's not easy to stay within the lines of open discussion while maintaining a controlled meeting, but I think this is something that we all need to try to do a better job of, especially me. In closing, I wish everyone would realize the committee of the whole meeting is an open committee meeting, and I hate Preston has left. And stop overreacting to discussion points. Board members should be able to openly discuss issues and question the status quo without people assuming some sort of conspiracy by board members to get them or destroy the school system. Thank you.
Well, as chairman, let me address my philosophy regarding that, and then, at least then, because I think this is good open discussion, and we know where we're all coming from as we continue to learn to work together. As chairman, I have always realized that I am still one member of the board. I am one voting member of the board, and I only have one vote. And I've really tried to represent my comments out in the public, specifically whether I'm representing the board or representing my opinion, and state that. That being said, I think all the rest of us have that same duty, and as far as I know, have done that. But in a board meeting, and especially the committee of the whole meeting, where it is an open discussion, I have always been reluctant to try to stop, even when I've recognized those same times that Mr. Page is talking about, when sometimes we do get back into bringing up old discussion points that have been talked about before, or even getting redundant and otherwise repetitive in the same discussion. So out of respect for everybody on here, though, having a voice, being elected to the board, I've always been reluctant to try to stop that. I don't want anybody to go out of here saying the chairman stopped me or did not give me a chance to speak. And so I've been reluctant, but if you all want me to try to do that and remind, politely, that we're kind of getting off track or maybe being redundant, or that, this point was allotted 15 minutes and here we've already been 40, or try to say something before we get to 40 minutes, I'm happy to do that if that's the board's pleasure. Again, I've never heard that from anybody before, that that's what they wanted me to do, and I have always erred on making sure everybody had a chance to say whatever they wanted to say.
Let me go next, okay? At this point, what I've always thought we're doing whenever I get an agenda is that we're going to meet in the Cal meeting, we're going to meet this evening, and we're going to stay until we've covered that agenda, whatever time it takes. I mean, that's what all of us have done. We've stayed until we cover it. Now, let me go historical just a minute. I remember when the agenda came out and there were no times on there. The times that are on there now are just suggestions. We think, and I know when people come in and tell Kelly they're going to talk about something, she'll ask them, well, how much time do you think you'll take? Well, we think it'll take 30 minutes. Well, like Mr. Page says, sometimes it takes an hour. Well, that's hard to curtail when we stop them and when we stop our discussion. But those are just suggestions, and it says the total might be 2 hours and we go 4 hours, and we know we've gone way over. So somebody's discussing and somebody's adding something that everybody is hearing. That's what it's for. Now, Mr. Page is correct in reference to we say some things that maybe aren't necessary, or we go over 3 times. But at the same time, it gives everybody that opportunity. And the time things, to me, if the time is a bother, I would take the times off entirely. Not even curtail anybody's how long you're going to take. And let them make their presentation, we make our discussion, we ask our questions, and we move on to the next topic. Because then, and we know how that is, it's just like being in church. Nobody ever hears anything past 12 o'clock. So if you look at that time and it says 20 minutes, you might not hear a thing he says past 20 minutes anyway. So I would suggest, along the same line, let's take the times off, put down the topics, and cover them as they come up.
Let me do the opposite side of that then. Of course, my wife tells me that you have the right to remain silent. I just don't have the ability. So I struggle with that all the time. So I'm one of the ones that probably needs to be called down too. But we had a problem with a lot of our agendas we were having with some of our other meetings, and we actually instituted a thing called 5 minutes to success or 10 minutes to success. And so when you got up as a speaker, you got 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So you didn't stand up and talk about, oh, I've been talking to the governor, or oh, it was a bad trip on the way here. You get to the point. You get to the point, make your story, and then sit back down. We had a timekeeper that popped them, that's enough. Now, what they would do is they would set a time at the end of every 10 people speaking that would say, this is question and answer. So if you had a question and answer about any of those that came through, that's where you had your discussion. I'm not saying we institute this, but we do need to sit down to, instead of being at 11 o'clock at night at a CAL meeting, we need to make sure that we are making the most efficient use of our time. Somewhere in the middle of all this, to me, should level out. That's, I mean,
Well, I think at this point, with you saying what you're saying, he's saying what he's saying, I'm saying what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Everybody's recognizing that there are some points that these, especially in our CAL meetings, that we could work with the time. But at the same time, these are things that we can work out without having time limits or something that we have to make a motion in a second and all that on. We can simply be aware of the fact that when the people make presentations, they make their presentation, and we move on. Our agendas, we have our time, and we take the time to cover it. It's like he said, I don't want to finish a topic and have somebody on this board that's sitting there say, I didn't get to say so-and-so. I want to hear everything that everybody has to say about that topic at that point. I mean,
I think some of the things we hear in the committee of the whole meeting are fascinating. And I learned so much, you know, from Mr. Page's questions, you know, from Charles's questions. You know, we are grown-ups. We have the times there. We can police ourselves a little bit. I mean, I'm okay with the times being on there. You know, I don't think we have to crack the whip, as it were, you know, for the exact times. Because I do have lots of questions when I see some of these great programs, and I want to learn more, so.
I would like to make a comment just based on, this wouldn't cover presentations made by non-board members, but Robert's rules default, which, you know, we're allowed to do whatever we want when it comes to that, but just the author, Roberts, when he wrote that, he had that same issue where, and believe it or not, in the 17th century, people were talking a whole lot more, because they used bigger words, right? But
They also met at the ale house.
yeah, there we go. I don't think that would solve our problems. But what that does, the default is any individual can only speak twice on a topic, okay? So if a motion is made, an individual can only speak twice. And it's not a time limit on each time they can speak, but if they only talk, you know, if Martin will say one thing, and then another person will talk, and then he says another, then he can't go anymore. That's just default. So that may be something you'd want to consider, maybe not. There's no time limits on that, but it does limit, and again, I think there's that dead horse beating that happens sometimes where stuff is rehashed. And maybe if you can only speak a certain amount of time, maybe you say everything you got to say, but that would just be a possible middle ground. No time limits, but amount of, you know, each time you could speak. And that's already in there. I mean, that's...
well, he's going to come up and say, I mean, that just, I wouldn't want to do that.
Okay.
Okay, I mean,
It's just an option.
personally, because he might say something, I say something, he says something, he says something, reminds him of something that he hadn't thought about. And he didn't say it originally. And again, I go back to the same thing. I want to hear everything that everybody has to say about that topic that we are discussing at that point. I don't want anybody to leave anything out because of time, the day of the week, or how dark it's getting outside. I want to hear it all. And then we can make a decision and move on.
I think you're right, because we don't need to curtail anybody's
No,
view.
I don't want to do that.
And we want to hear that, so.
Well, I think I mean, again, believe it or not, I've watched this for 14 years, and I've watched the clock, I've watched people, I've watched a lot of personalities that have come and gone on the board. And I think we all have a respect for each other and a respect for the school system and the students primarily, to make sure that we have represented by our thoughts, you know, the work that needs to be done. So I really hate personally to impose any particular rules. I think I would just like to ask us all, if Martin agrees, on this too, and all of you agree, that we be respectful of the time. I mean, our meetings have gotten long, probably a lot longer than is really being efficient and being productive, and we need to look at that. The one thing that I don't like specifically about, I like to see the time limit because I think it gives us an idea of how much time the administration thinks they need to present the topic. And most of those speakers generally stick within those time frames. It's us as a board that expands the items. You know, and some of them we expand on a lot more than others, and sometimes that causes the speakers then to go longer, trying to make sure they've answered our questions. The one thing I want to be cautious about as chairman is that if we have, say, a 15-minute allotment on something, that one board member doesn't take 12 minutes of that 15 minutes, and then others don't have an opportunity to talk. And I don't know how we protect that unless we do impose a rule with time limits on speaking, but then I think that squelches ideas. And I don't want us to go in there in a role or a mode that's defensive, you know, from the very beginning. But I think if we're all just aware of it, maybe try that for a little bit and see how it works.
Well, Mr. Chairman, like I said, I appreciate the ability to speak my mind, but I don't totally disagree with Charles on if we're going to not have any time constraints, the times probably shouldn't be on there. I'm fine with it. I'm retired. I can stay up as late as y'all want to. And I have no problem with that. I just would like to see the, you know, if